Hey, what's up everybody? This is Joshua Casper. I'm here with Plugin Boutique, and today we're checking out Reference by Mastering in the Mix. Reference is an incredible tool that gives you actionable information about your masters and your mixes. For this video, I'm going to concentrate on using Reference for the mastering process, but most of this information can be applied to using it during your mixing process as well. The big difference between using Reference for mixing and mastering is the fact that when you're using it for mastering, you're going to load your pre-master, and when you're using it for mixing, you're going to load other masters to use as targets or goals when you're doing your mixing inside of your project. So let's go ahead and get started. What I'm going to do is load a pre-master inside of Reference. Boom, now I have the pre-master. So the pre-master is going to be heard when I click the Reference tab, and the original is that pre-master but being heavily processed from my mastering plugins. I'm using this inside of Ableton Live, and the mastering plugins are just simple mastering rack and an EQ just for demonstration purposes. So the first thing you want to do is just go ahead and listen to the two tracks side by side and see what you can hear.
Remember this. There is so much boldness in our displays.
Okay, so there are two main things that we're looking for when we A/B those. First is the difference in output volume. When something is louder, it's generally perceived by the brain to be better, and it has to do with different frequencies. The bass sounds better, the higher frequencies sound clearer just because they're louder, not necessarily because they're better. So the first thing you ever want to do when you're using an A/B system like this is to do what's called relative gain matching. In relative gain matching, just make sure that the output perceived loudness is the same between the reference track and the master track. And inside of Reference, it's really easy to do. All you need to do is click this button up here in the top right. And now that those lines are the same height, everything's going to be the same in terms of output volume. So let's go ahead and check that out.
There is so much boldness in our displays.
So there we go. The output volume is relatively the same. There are some differences, but those differences have to do with how we're processing the audio in the mastering chain and not just the limiter output volume. So that's always a great thing to do, and how easy it is inside of Reference, big plus in my book. The next thing you want to do is go ahead and click the sync button right here. And now that those lines are parallel and centered in the same spot, it means that we can bounce back and forth between the original and the reference seamlessly, so we don't get distracted by any glitches in time over the course of the track. So if we bounce back and forth, there isn't any stuttering going on. They're playing at exactly the same speed and exactly the same time, and the jump between the two is seamless, so we can really concentrate on the sonic differences as opposed to being distracted by anything else.
Remember this. There is so much boldness in our displays.
So perfect. We're already off to the races here. And just one other thing, right now we're on mirror mode, which is using the sync function. If you're using this in the mixing process, you just want to go free, and that way Reference isn't trying to sync up tracks that can't be synced up. These tracks are identical, so they can be synced up, and it's a good thing to have them synced up. But when you're using this in the mixing process and you just have other tracks you're trying to get to or emulate in terms of the mixing, you just want to have free there, and that way it's not warping or doing anything crazy to the audio. They're just playing as is, and you can really concentrate on the sound. We have the metering bar right here, which shows us LUFS, which is like perceived loudness over a specified period of time, usually about 3 seconds, or the track as a whole. The peak levels, and then the gain. And as you can see, we're at negative 8.7, and that's because when we did the relative gain matching, Reference decided that the mastering track needed to come down negative 8.7 decibels in order to be at the same level as the reference track. There's also the LUFS and peak meters. Always want to be checking those to make sure you're hitting your goals, to make sure everything is where it should be. Next up is the Trinity Display, and it's named that because it gives us 3 key components of the mix, which we can then use to adjust any sort of effects processing that we're doing in the mastering chain. So right now we have 3 frequency bands, and we can see the frequency ranges that are set out. So we have from 20 to 200 hertz, and then 200 hertz to 2000 hertz, and then 2000 and above. If we want to add more frequency ranges, we can just control click in here and we'll get another one. If we want to get rid of them, again, just control click to get rid of it. When I play the audio now, we're going to notice a few things happening. So let's go ahead and do that and then talk about what each one of these things means.
Greed, I say them banks, bankers, politicians, politics and their demonic tricks. Hear this! Brother killing brother, we no care for one another. It's a shame, it's a shame. We may be different from each other, different color, different mother, but we were all born the same old.
Okay, so while that audio was playing, you might have noticed some things. First, this solid white line was either above or below the 0 dB threshold, and that has to do with the balance of the frequencies in the range that it's displaying. So here between 0 and 200 hertz, the line actually went down a little bit, and that means that the frequency range is actually quieter for that band in the mastered version in comparison to the reference track, which again is the same track without anything being applied to it. There is also some really nice glowing lines or dots that are moving towards that white line, and that has to do with the dynamic range. And for the mastering version, if they're going towards that white line, it means there's less dynamic range. If they're going away from that white line, it means that there's a bigger dynamic range. And then we have the third of the Trinity, which is up here at the top, and this has to do with the stereo spread of the audio being fed in. So right now the top line has to do with the original and the bottom line has to do with the reference. So I'm going to go ahead and let this audio play for a second, and we're really going to kind of look at what's happening with these 3 different visual cues to tell us what's going on with the audio. I'm also going to bounce back and forth between the original and the reference so we can kind of hear what's going on as well. But again, reference is really giving us the visual tools to make changes to whatever we need to do. So let's go ahead and check it out.
It's a shame. Hear the message. Remember this. There is so much madness in our displays. To live in peace and gladness, humanity fails. Well, it's the root.
Okay, so using this information, what we could do is actually use the EQ to boost some of this low end, boost some of this middle frequency band, and maybe add a little bit of width to it using a stereo tool. Then bring up the gain for both of those just so it's louder in the mix if that's what we're going for. It doesn't need to be. The compression looks pretty good for all 3. I mean, we got a decent amount of compression on all 3 bands that we have on display here. So that's the beginning of using the Trinity Display to understand what's happening with the mastered version versus the unmastered version. Now, what's really cool is when you start using this with a mix situation. So we can add more reference tracks here just by clicking this plus button. We can go in and add a number of different reference tracks. So we can take something mastered by the professionals that have done really well out there in the market and sound similar to the track that we're trying to mix or master. So we can use those to get the targets that we want, and using those to understand the frequency balance of the bands that we have set out, the stereo spread of each one of the bands, and how much compression ours has in comparison to those professionally mastered ones. We can really start making some key actionable decisions to how to make our mixes and masters sound better. So, I mean, that's just a very quick overview of what's possible with reference. I highly recommend it. I've been using it a lot and making some really great changes to my mastering that I wasn't even aware that I was doing wrong, or not doing wrong necessarily, but I could be doing better. Having the visual cues lined up with the relatively gain matched scenarios and being able to bounce back and forth and really focus in on what needs to be changed or what's being changed in a right way or in a bad way has really helped me blossom as a mastering engineer. So I highly recommend checking it out. It's available right now on Plugin Boutique. Go check it out today. I hope you learned something. We'll see you next time.